Joining us now to discuss what is transpiring internationally, General Michael Hayden. Not only did he serve in the Air Force, but he also served our nation as director of the National Security Agency and the Central Intelligence Agency. He's now a principal at the Chertoff Group. Mike, we thank you very much for making time for us this morning on America's Forum.
Always a pleasure, JD. You said we're going to talk about the international situation. I don't know if you've got enough time.
Well, we're in our brief time, maybe we'll describe this as Mission Impossible. I'll tell you, our current defense secretary got fairly close to that. At Camp Pendleton the other day, there was Chuck Hagel talking to Marines saying the world is exploding all over. Do you agree with Secretary Hagel's assessment?
Yeah, I do. And let me tell you the two factors that are playing, I think, and reinforcing one another. Number one is we just know a lot more things about the world. It's all so intimate. I mean, we all get a cell phone video, don't we, by the evening news of something happening anywhere in the world. So it's making a stronger impression on us. But JD, beyond that, objectively, more things are melting down than certainly any time in my lifetime.
Well, part of that meltdown going on in Iraq, you visited with us a while back saying Iraq, for all intents and purposes as a nation, is over, yet the Iraqis, with their current political structure, are trying to pick up the pieces. Al-Maliki has finally stepped down as prime minister. How does that change the dynamic in Iraq, both politically and in terms of battling ISIS?
Well, number one, with Maliki still in power, no progress is possible. With Maliki out of power, it may still be that no progress is possible, but at least now you've got a reasonable chance to get some things off center. But JD, I'm kind of standing by what I said earlier. It's kind of like Humpty Dumpty. We're not putting this whole thing back together again, or at least not back together anywhere near the way it used to look.
So the situation, you stand by the notion that eventually both tribal and geographical concerns will break Iraq apart.
Well, I mean, look, right now in the world of the possible, and this is out there on the edge of desirable but probably low likelihood, is that we end up with three regions, each of them now looking like the Kurdish region, which is, goes by the official name, the Kurdish Autonomous Region, conducts an awful lot of their own affairs. I mean, if we could get to that, we'd call that a win. But even that's going to be very hard to do.
Well,
let alone get a unitary Iraq.
Getting from here to there's another variable in terms of ISIS and what it is doing to try and establish the modern caliphate, what it is doing to Christians. Now, understood, we sent some military in to take a look at what was going on Mount Sinjar. They were called assessors. Their assessment is apparently it's not as bad as we thought it was. Waleed Faris was on this program yesterday. He strongly disagreed with the Pentagon assessment as expressed on the pages of the New York Times. Take a listen.
The blockade is still on. ISIS is still surrounding Mount Sinjar. It was not broken by a military force. So it is not true that the Yazidi issue in Mount Sinjar has been solved. What is true is that it needs to be solved in the next few days.
Do you agree with Waleed's assessment of what's going on there on Mount Sinjar?
JD, I just don't have the facts. I mean, you had an on-ground assessment team give one view. You've got another one on your show yesterday. Let me pass on that, but add very quickly. Even if that situation is okay, we are really far, far, far away from creating circumstances with which we would be comfortable. The president put out some very limited views: protect the Yazidis and protect Erbil. But, I mean, if that's all we got, we also got an Islamic caliphate unperturbed, uninterrupted, and unattacked in the middle of the Middle East.
Let's turn to the Kurdish region. Now, at long last, we're arming the Kurds. The French have gotten in on that, and the British Prime Minister David Cameron talking about arming the Kurds. Will the Kurds be able to stop ISIS?
I think they will. They actually were living a bit on a puffed-up reputation because they had fought well in the past, but hadn't actually had to fight a good opposing force recently. Someone described them as kind of a checkpoint army. And I think, unfortunately, that was about true. So they got stunned by ISIS. And frankly, and here's something that's really weird, JD, the terrorists were outgunning the army. They had more advanced weapons. But look, the Kurds are our friends. You will not talk to an American who served in northern Iraq, intelligence or military, who doesn't like the Kurds and think the Kurds can deliver. So if we establish the right kind of relationship with them, maybe a little guidance, maybe a little indirect fire support, I think they stand just fine.
Speaking of relationships internationally, it's safe to say our relationship with Russia is changing greatly because of the actions of the Russians. Just a few hours ago, Russian military vehicles again seen very close to the Ukraine border. Of course, the Russians say they want to send in humanitarian aid. What's going on there?
You know, hard to figure. I actually saw a press account this morning, I think it was out of London, JD, that although the aid convoy stopped, some armored personnel carriers had crossed from Russia into the Ukraine. Now, that would just be of a piece of what Putin's been doing in terms of delivering heavy equipment to the forces, the separatists that he supports there. Here's where we are, I think, tactically on the battlefield. The Ukrainians got their act together. They've regained a lot of ground. Surprised me a little, surprised Putin a lot. These guys are in a tight spot. But I think we may be approaching another point of stasis where the Ukrainians have regained, I think, about 2/3 of the lost territory. But the last third, Donetsk, towns like that, are really tough nut to crack. So we may be headed to another period here where we don't see much motion on the battlefield.
Well, you remain in motion in terms, you may have left government service, but Mike Hayden, you continue to show up in magazines. You continue to be mentioned. Obviously, we thank you for being here with us on America's Forum. Don't know if you've heard or seen the latest issue of Wired magazine, but the cover...
Whatever are you talking about?
Well, Edward Snowden's on the cover, but inside is a picture of you with Edward Snowden at a gala in 2011. I guess they didn't ask your permission to use that photo. What are your thoughts about that and about Mr. Snowden's status there with the Russians?
Well, Mr. Snowden remains a defector, all right? Whether he's got a picture of me on his wall or not. JD, Armed Forces Communications Electronics Association, has a gala every winter near Fort Meade to support their scholarship program. The Chertoff group, you mentioned part of the Chertoff group, we always get a table with that to contribute to a worthy cause. I've got times since I've left government. I'm pretty sure in 2011, which is the alleged date of the picture, I was actually the guest speaker. And I recall I gave a hell of a speech. And afterwards, an awful lot of the young folks were coming up and they wanted to talk and then they wanted to get their picture taken. So obviously Mr. Snowden was one of that group. But if the picture is authentic, at least from my point of view, JD, it's not memorable because I don't remember the young man.
Well, Mike, for what it's worth, you looked really nice in that picture in your evening attire, friend. So we thank you very much for your time and your insights as always.
Thank you.
And for in-depth analysis on these and other international issues on the web, go to lignet.com. Now, as Miranda mentioned, a calm night in Ferguson, Missouri last night, but after the break, we will discuss how the government's actions may have actually inflamed tensions. We'll break it down as part of our daily intelligence briefing coming up.